Hi, welcome to the session of Cybersecurity Imperatives. My name is Vishal Salvi. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Infosys and also head of the cybersecurity business. Today, we're going to have a very esteemed panel of speakers who can touch upon various facets of cybersecurity and how it is shaping our current and our future. So, we're going to have Jill Swed, who's the CEO of Checkpoint Software Technologies. We're going to have Ashish Mishra, who's the Managing Director for Interbrand India, and Thomas Lean, who's the Global Chief Information Security Officer for BHP. But before we get into the panel discussion, I would like to invite our special guest, Mr. Nior Gillen, Ambassador of Israel to India, to speak a few words.
Hi everyone, my name is Naor Gilon and I'm the newly appointed Ambassador of Israel to India. I was overwhelmed and excited by the warm reception I received from the Indian people and government. Next year, India and Israel are celebrating 30 years of diplomatic relations. Behind these diplomatic relations, there is a vast cooperation between our countries in many fields, based especially on technology and innovation. It started with agriculture and water and defense, and I believe that technology and innovation are going to be high on our agenda for the coming years. We are very proud in the participation of Israel, the persistent participation in the Bengaluru Tech Summit. This year, we are really bringing a special speaker, Mr. Gil Shved. Gil Shved is the founder and CEO of Checkpoint. He is considered by many as the inventor of firewall and has many patents registered on his name. He is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Israel. Checkpoint has very vast activity all around India, like many other Israeli companies. I would like to wish everyone a very fruitful and successful conference, and let's pray that next year, COVID will enable us also to meet in person. Thank you very much.
Hi, Gil. Good to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great having everybody here. It's an amazing opportunity and wonderful audience. Great to be here.
So, Gil, I think to start with, one of the important questions that we have is, there are so many investments which are happening in cybersecurity, whether it's services or platforms, and so much of research going on. Why is it that we're still seeing a constant rise in the number of breaches and attacks? And why is it that we are not able to control this if we are doing so much of work in protection?
First, that's a wonderful question. It's a great question, and I think I can go on and take an hour to explain all the elements, but I'll focus on one element which I think is the most important. The attacks that we are seeing today are what we call the fifth generation or Gen 5 of cyber attacks. These attacks are very sophisticated, they are what we call polymorphic, so it's hard to identify them. They look differently each time we see them. They are multi-vector, so it's not that an attacker is attacking a specific target or a specific web server. The attack can go from our mobile device to a computer to a data center all the way to the cloud, or vice versa, and the malicious payload only gets at the end. And these Gen 5 attacks are very sophisticated to stop, are very hard to stop. But the problem is that most of the technology we use today to block attack is Gen 3. And most organizations today are like 2 generations behind. So our focus should be absolutely on prevention first, because if you deal with it after you've been hacked, it's too late. On prevention of Gen 5 attacks.
Yeah, so it's basically a cat and mouse game, right? You constantly need to innovate, constantly need to adopt new technologies. And it's not about, I've kind of bought technology now and that's it. I need to constantly keep upgrading as the attack, methodologies and threat actor strategies keep changing.
No, you're absolutely right. The technologies that we are dealing with needs to evolve all the time. Unlike other things that we can say version X version 10 is good for us. Here the attackers are saying which versions we have. And what we need is to have dynamic technologies that deal with what we call zero-day attacks, the attacks that we haven't seen before. In many cases, by the way, you'll see that a lot of the brain behind the blocking and identifying the new attack is in the cloud and is using AI and is using all these technologies to constantly in real time, we call it threat cloud, to find the new attacks and update that in real time. So you're absolutely right, and that's the fundamental law we're dealing with it. Not static technologies, but technologies that evolve all the time.
Got it. So Gil, you run one of the successful cybersecurity companies in the world, and this massive change that we have gone through, pivoting to working from home and hybrid workplace. How has this challenged your architecture, and what do you think is going to be the future change that we should expect because of this massive pivoting to a different mode of operations that is going to have to the cybersecurity architecture of today and tomorrow?
So I think the model that we've seen, the model of working from home, the model of much more reliance on the network that we've seen on the last 2 years will continue, even though people will return to offices and so on. It will have a huge impact on the cyber architectures. The attack surface is greatly expanded. I mean, if in the past we said that our crown jewels, our manufacturing floor, our trading floor, our source code for development is very secured, can only be accessed physically within the company for people that come to work. All of that is now open. All of places that we never thought will be open to the network are now open. And that has a huge impact on the cyber architecture of the future, because we need even more than we did before to secure every endpoint in the network, both inside the company, because of the many cases like that being attacked, and also our home computers. Even, my daughter's computer that I may be able now to use it to access the company network. So we need to deal with new challenges and new architecture that are far more secure than we ever had before.
And there is no conversation or discussion complete without talking about cloud, right? So, how are you seeing the adoption of cloud shaping the current and the future of cybersecurity?
So absolutely, cloud is one of the most important elements today in IT in general, and I think it has a huge impact. And by the way, the last 2 years have greatly evolved in the cloud because we shifted more and more workloads into cloud architectures. Now, cloud has impact everywhere. It has an impact because the fact that every organization relies more on cloud application means that we need to secure these applications. And it's not just like securing the previous generation. The previous generation on our data center, we had, multiple levels of security layers that surround our servers and application. In the cloud, if something is being open, if I forget the key or the password to something, it's widely available on the fastest link on the internet, and some bot, automatic robot will find that key and will get in within minutes. Not only that, cloud applications are usually developed by a lot of interconnection. It's not one big application, one server that you can, contain and secure. A cloud application on the average have at least 15 connections to other applications. And these applications can be in the data center. They can be, by the way, SaaS applications that are run by external vendors. That's the nature of the architectures of the cloud. And every link like that is suspect to hacking and can be a backdoor to our system. So it's much more complicated to secure these environments, and cloud is definitely something that impacts that. On the same time, by the way, cloud can also be a delivery for more, as I talked about, real-time security. So we have a lot of our security engines with AI in the cloud that can identify and transfer information in real time. So there are also benefits in the cloud in terms of delivering more up-to-speed, sophisticated security in real time.
So Gil, you must be talking to a lot of leaders and CXOs across the globe. When you're having this conversation, how much is this about technology and its evolution? And how much is about business risks? And what do we need to do and how do we need to protect? What is it that you're hearing and what are the conversations?
So that's an absolutely good conflict. On one hand, what we need to deliver, which is cybersecurity, needs to be something, a utility that's technical, and it shouldn't be the top level of the company that deals with it. And it's it's one of the most, maybe the most technical area in IT in general to understand, and let's understand the cyber environments and the risks and the solutions. On the same time, first, when a company is being hacked today, it used to be a technical issue. My computer doesn't work. We need to do something with it. Today, it's something that impacts the business at the highest level. It impacts the reputation of the business. It impacts the operations. And unfortunately, we see it pretty much every week. I mean, we've seen a hospital being shut down last week. We've seen the entire US East Coast oil supply being hacked. And that has an impact even beyond the company that's being hacked. That's a national level. I mean, just to this example, a hospital and the supply of oil, which are private organizations maybe, but have an impact on the entire nation and the way it stands. Even, by the way, when a website, I've seen last week a website that was hacked. The website contains the information of hundreds of thousands of people, millions, and sometimes even hundreds of millions of people. Now these hundreds of millions of citizens will be victims to other attacks. And that becomes from a website that's being hacked and needs to pay the price to an entire nation that needs to secure its citizens. So clearly the policy issues around cybers are far more than the technical issues. I think the technical issues sometimes limits us because the technical people in many cases, and again, we work with our customers that are mainly technical people and they are amazing. But in many cases, it's looking at the technical problem instead of defining that what you need is a clear policy. I would say my highlights for this policy, it needs to be a policy of what we call prevention first. Keep the attackers out, not about detection after it happens and remediation. So it needs to be prevention. It needs to be about consolidation. Yes, we may need multiple systems, we may need multiple technologies, but we need to minimize the number of systems. And mainly the consolidation is important to make sure that all the elements of the system work together. And last and not least, it needs to be multi-vector. It needs to address all the areas of our systems: the cloud, the users, the data center, the computers, the IoT that we are seeing more and more, mobile devices. Take as an example, the mobile devices that we use maybe are the weakest link today. They see us, they hear us, they see us and our data and our networks all the time. They're all the time connected to the public network, so they are the best backdoor to everything. And yet less than 1% of companies actually secure their mobile devices. So that's kind of shocking when you come to think about it. But in terms of policy, it's not about a specific technology, it's understanding we need to secure all the access vectors, consolidate, and do it with prevention first architecture. That would be my principles. And I think if a C-level, if a CEO or CIO would ask it from their organization, we would move forward very, very fast. And I think we can fight that. I think it's not a lost battle. It's a battle that we can win, the battle against the bad guys, against the hackers.
No, absolutely. I think the three key messages from this brief conversation that I'm taking is, one is focus on prevention and make a comprehensive prevention so that all vectors are covered together. Number two, consolidates and simplify so that it's easier for us to manage cybersecurity. And number three is, the bigger topic is policies and making sure everybody understands their role in terms of driving this change. Technology, we will sort it out. But the policies are very, very important to drive a lasting change in the overall ecosystem. Jill, thank you so much for joining us today and giving this valuable inputs. I'm sure the audience will benefit from this and look forward to such conversation in future as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
So moving on, let's get our next speaker, Mr. Ashish Mishra, to talk about the impact to the brand value because of cybersecurity. So thank you, Ashish, for joining us today. The cybersecurity risks clearly have a profound impact to the brand value of any given organization. And so therefore having a topic of how a brand has a direct impact and how does it relate to the topic of cybersecurity is very important. I'm glad that you are here today, and it'll be good for us to get some your perspectives on how this topic is unfolding. So let me start by asking you this question. Clearly Infosys and Interbrand came together to do this unique survey of the most valuable brands and how its impact to the cybersecurity and also the brand value that is at risk because of that. What are your most important learnings from this survey that we undertook?
Thanks, Vishal. You're right. I think the fact that last year we embarked upon what may have been world's first data-based analysis of the impact of data breaches on brand itself is a massive finding. The first learning, therefore, was the effort of quantifying the impact of data breach on brand, something that is necessary for a clearer recognition of the pervasive and long-term impact breaches cause. It was revealing to infer the potential brand value loss for the top 100 best global brands to be an astounding $223 billion. That's about 10% of the total brand value of about 2.3 trillion USD generated by top 100 global brands. So the very first finding, I would say, was a real and tangible measure of value at risk only in the area of brand. At the second level, the diagnostics, the insights of the study were simple. The obvious reasons for the high value at risk we found were characterized by the fundamental shifts in the way customers interact with brands. Now, we all know it's getting increasingly more digital and hybrid in this new paradigm. Customers are driven by the higher personalization and customization that technology offers. And that's really what's driving the adoption, which is why they knowingly, unwittingly, or sometimes inadvertently allow access to personal data to the brands they consume, thereby exposing themselves to the risks. Responsibility of safeguarding their customers' interests thus devolves upon the brands that were trusted in the first place by customers while they were seeking better experiences. That was at the start driving the adoption itself. Now, cybersecurity therefore becomes an integral part of the customer experience. Finally, the study revealed specific areas that put the brand value at risk due to a breach. Again, there are human truths at play. Brands, if you understand what brands really are, what brands really do, brands at some levels they signify relationships with customers. The relationship could be that of a friend, it could be of a companion, it could be a lover, it could be a guide, it could be a healer, and many more relationships. Now, what happens when a breach affects a relationship? Well, number one, it destroys trust. Trust, we know, is the foundation of any relationship. Secondly, it creates bad blood, it creates a lot of bad news. And finally, it puts you off and reduces your engagement and affinity with the relationship. These human truths resonated with the findings of our study too. The top 3 brand strength factors that emerged as causes of the value loss were trust, presence, and affinity. These 3 factors are 3 crucial ones amongst the top 10 factors that drive value for brands. And a serious negative impact on these accounts for a high brand value at risk due to breach, as we saw in the number.
No, it's truly fascinating, to see how the technical topic like cybersecurity has such a profound impact towards the way how brands are being measured, and the trust part, the affinity part are very, very important. I think if you look at in terms of cybersecurity world today, we're really talking about democratizing cybersecurity and really making it broad-based across the stakeholders. And it starts with the leadership, right? So we have the CXOs, and each of the CXO really playing an important role And in the context of brand, the CMO has a very important role to play, right? So in your mind, what is that role that the CMO needs to play, and what are some ideas that you have, that the modern CMO should look at when it comes to getting engaged in this whole process of not just looking at cybersecurity from a risk point of view, but also from an opportunity point of view.
Great. So, what we need to understand as we attempt to answer this question, Vishal, is to see how customer behavior has transformed. Now, along with the way the customer interaction with brand has shifted, which has become more digital and hybrid, and it's also gotten driven by the experience, there needs to be a shift in the way brands are marketed to them, and that's fairly obvious. If you look at what is really driving value, what are the biggest value creators that we see around today, and I'm again going back to our league table. The biggest value creator brand of the world, biggest value creator brands of the world in the recent years, as per our league table, best global brands, are the likes of Amazon or Netflix, or brands that are built on harnessing the customer identity programs and data. Now, subscription model brands are, as a genre, again one of the top value creators, which really means managing lifetime value, CRM, data protection. All these become the front and center of new marketing. This requires shifts in marketing, and the shifts need to be fundamental. We're talking about shifts that are the understanding of the marketing organization, its structure, its focus, and its capabilities. Now, once these fundamental shifts are understood by marketing, which still has some way to go, there would be an immediate realization of the need to demystify cybersecurity. You touched upon the broad basing of cybersecurity. I would go to the extent of saying there is a massive need for what in our language we would call rebranding of cybersecurity. Many of the new pivotal transformation areas in the new world, unfortunately, are still being spoken of and dealt at an industry level. They're being dealt at a government level. And I would take the example, the exemplar of, say, climate change, which is yet another mega risk to the world on in the league of security. Now, each of these kind of mega risks to the world are unfortunately still and strangely still being spoken about in a technical manner. They're still being spoken about at an industry body level or at a government level. There's not been a serious effort yet to engage and involve the citizens and people. And that's really the heart of trying to broad base, as you said, or rebranding of cybersecurity as we are suggesting. Now, the conversations around such mega issues impacting everybody in the world are to be dejargonized, to be taken to customers, and marketing needs to take cybersecurity in a simplified form, in a relatable form, in a manner that the citizens and people can relate to, and that really would create a pull. That's something that would shift the adoption. As of now, we're trying to drive it top down. We're trying to drive it from industry, from a state level. But unless and until we engage customers and citizens by making them understand the risks involved and create that pull, the adoption is going to be difficult. So this universal education and sensitization is understandably a mammoth task. That's the reason why it's still not being done. And it cannot be done by one organization or one agency. Therefore, the natural corollary is the need for marketing to look at partnerships to accomplish this. If howsoever large, one organization cannot accomplish it, then people, then organizations, then governments will have to come together. And therefore, partnership is one advice that we would give to marketing organizations. Partnerships of what kind? Partnerships within the organization. Now, the structural confluence of the CEO, the CMO, the CIO is a part of partnership within the organization. Partnerships will need to be driven at the industry level. So competing brands will need to become partners. Competing organizations will need to become partners. with shared roles, with shared interests, with shared goals, with shared costs, collaborations with different industry bodies as well as state. So it's not about technology sector, it will have to be across verticals and collaborations. Now, the third key area is about creating standards. Now, it is, if it is backed by partnerships and universal recognitions, specific measures and standards will help create a clear need and compliance that once we take it to the end customer will be hard to ignore. So I think those are the fundamental pivotal changes marketing organizations need to make to be able to really take cybersecurity to the broader world or to rebrand cybersecurity.
I mean, very, very interesting thoughts there. And, we are having that conversation. We're starting from here today in this panel. And I hope there are many CMOs listening to this conversation because clearly, all of them have a role to play to really drive this broad-based conversation and sort of democratize cybersecurity across all the stakeholders. It cannot be just the role of a CISO who's completely inadequate to really manage this topic, the softer elements of the topic, and needs support from a CMO and others to really make it a real impactful change within the ecosystem. So thank you for that ideas. I think if you look at when we talk about cybersecurity, and there are a lot of things that we do to prevent and protect organizations, but in today's day and age, we see so many number of organizations facing high frequency breaches and high impact breaches. That it's you need to really have a good mechanism of building cyber resiliency and responding to an attack or a breach in a very decisive manner. And one of the very important facets of that breach, which is very evident from all the breaches that have happened in past, is in terms of how you manage your communication to your stakeholders, which again is a domain of a CMO, right? So any thoughts or any ideas in terms of what is the role that a CMO needs to play, and what are the activations that they need to do to really deal with an incident like this, given that it is a real problem right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say ideally the focus should be to set up consciousness, partnerships, as we spoke about, structural changes, setting standards, and having visibility, which comes from a scale that can be driven through the partnerships. And all this for the demystified security, for the broad-based security, for the rebranded cybersecurity. Now, that needs to be the focus to prevent breaches rather than continue the emphasis on measures to contain the damage due to a breach. But that said, accidents do happen and they will continue to happen. And what to do in such cases is best exemplified again by a human approach. Acknowledgement and owning up any gaps that may have happened is really the first up thing to do without any delay. Followed by reassurances and perhaps lobbying to create insurances for damage control. And those are things that may be a good tool to innovate and bring into the system. It's about talking about constant feedback. It's talking about real action, talking about preparedness, reassuring that it would be prevented again. And those are the kind of things that would go down well. A constant feedback loop and constant engagement with customers, as well as having a constant engagement with social media and media, would help contain the reputational damage. And those kind of constancies of engagement, rather than one-off engagements that we have seen historically, would again be useful. And there is, while it's not really a data breach, a security breach case study, but there was a wonderful example that I witnessed about 3 years back while I was in New York. And there was this incident that happened in a Starbucks store where there were 2 customers who were not buying and consuming anything, and they were hanging out for a while. And after an extended period of their occupying the store, the manager had a scuffle with them and finally they were arrested. This created a huge uproar in America. And what did Starbucks do? The very next morning, and I read the papers, I was there was a full page letter that was issued by the CEO where he apologized for the incident very genuinely. He spoke about how Starbucks is using this incident to change its policies, to change how Starbucks defines its customer. And the change they made was the customer is no longer someone who comes and buys things. The customer is also the non-buying visitor. He also announced that there would be a 3-day lockdown, a 3-day shutting up of all the Starbucks stores in America, whereby all the employees would be taken to an offsite where they would be reoriented for their behaviors. So Starbucks incurred, because of these actions, millions of dollars of losses. But they wanted to do it because they wanted to protect something which probably is the most valuable thing for brands and businesses and people. And that thing is called trust. And that's what they did. And that's what I think we should do.
Yeah, I think, this is very important. And, a lot of times in case of cybersecurity breaches, you realize it very late that you are so unprepared. And so I think, these topics related to, what the brand study is showing in terms of the profound impact to the brand value, the very important role that a CMO has in today's context in terms of shaping the way cybersecurity should be treated as an opportunity, to promote your brand, rather than just managing risk, and also the role that they have to play in terms of response, in terms of communication. I think is very, you have really highlighted them, all of them, very clearly in this discussion. So thank you so much, Ashish. It was great having you here. And I hope our audience will actually learn from this and get some ideas in terms of what they need to do to, connect the brand and the cyber risk together. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal.
So moving on to the next topic, it's my pleasure to introduce Thomas Lee, the Chief Information Security Officer for BHP, who will talk about the changing role of the CISOs in the modern enterprise. Thank you so much, Thomas, for taking your time and joining in today. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Vishal.
So, Thomas, the way, how today cybersecurity has evolved, clearly our roles as CISOs have transformed and are transforming, right? So any comments on, given the current context, in terms of how the threat landscape itself has changed, how the world has changed because of pandemic, what is the impact to this, to the day-to-day life of a CISO?
Thanks, Vishal. Great question. And talk about changes, man, that's been a massive change over the last couple of years. And then with the pandemic, that kind of accelerated big time. Yeah. So think about the role of the CISO a few years ago. You've been there as well as I did many years ago. It was all seen as IT security, and where we thought cyber was a IT problem. Probably in the last 10 plus years, that has significantly changed. And with, the innovation that's been coming through and the businesses adopting a lot more digital solutions to drive value and, derive value from everything they do, the reliance on technology significantly went up. And as a result, your digital attack surface has increased. And as a result, the role of the CISO is now to securely enable innovation and to make sure that we protect the value and deliver the value that the business is trying to achieve. So massive shift in paradigm from protecting IT systems to protecting the business processes that support the value delivery. It's a huge shift in there. So I would call it as more of a business enabler, movement from a risk manager and not letting go of any of those, using those lens, enabling the business. I think that's my perspective. And I think it's significantly shifted with the businesses becoming more and more reliant on digital solutions in the last couple of years, especially with the pandemic.
Yeah, actually, very true. Because I think seeing the value and delivering the value is becoming a very important aspect of cybersecurity, and in today's context, it's becoming more of a differentiator, and therefore the spotlight on the CISO in a very significant manner. And talking about the spotlight, clearly the board, has clearly acknowledged this problem. Also there is a more face time with the boards that a CISO has to go through now on a quarterly or sometimes even more frequently. Clearly there is a need to give them assurance in terms of how you are ensuring that the cybersecurity risks are managed, but also there is an expectation to see how we can actually seek their sponsorship in your agenda. So any thoughts on how that narrative and how those conversations are going on?
Yeah, absolutely, Vishal. I think that's the fundamental shift in thinking as well. We're looking at the CISO as someone who is just protecting the business, protecting a whole lot of systems. What's really important is to align this from a language and the messaging perspective, align the CISO's messaging to the business priorities. Essentially, what that means is, talk about the risk and the risk to the business priorities and how we can mitigate that. So the minute we are able to communicate that, it's about demystifying cyber risk to a group of executives who are not the experts in that space, right? So the role you've got to play there is to translate that from a cyber/technology language to a business imperative and the priorities, how that will impact the business. The thing is, budgets is not something that it's going to be constrained for every business, every organization, but it's a prioritization activity that happens. The risk appetite. So understand the risk appetite, understand the business priorities, and translate that into how that cyber risk impacts that business priority, and how we got to mitigate a risk situation that's beyond appetite. So once that language is clear, the messaging is clear. Once they understand what the impact is, then it's a risk acceptance versus value discussion, which is an easier conversation.
Yeah, I mean, basically, what I'm taking from your message is that communication is key. And in today's modern CISO needs to really be able to communicate the right messaging in the language that the board would understand, and then vice versa, try delivering that message from the board to your organization so that you're able to drive that within the organization. So communication and getting that effective messaging is a very key aspect of the modern CISO. So I think shifting gears a bit, Thomas, in terms of looking at the topic of cybersecurity itself, and we do talk about multiple things that we need to do to build controls and build preventive, detective, monitoring controls. But in today's context, cyber resiliency is becoming a very important aspect of your security program and your security strategy, right? And while it is important to prevent attacks, we know that you also need to have a resilient organization to respond and mitigate if there is any breach or any incident which is happening. So any thoughts on how that is shaping up, and what are you seeing that is happening across the industry, across the domain?
Yeah, great question, Vishal. I think the importance of resilience, in the world where we have lots more digital solutions, and some people call it digital trust. And what does that really mean? It's the resilience, the quality, and the ability for the business to continue operations. So the reality is, the complexity of the cyber attack, so to speak, is increasing. The frequency is increasing. The shift that we need to have, and which is what a lot of organizations I see is doing, is target resilience. What do we mean by that? It's resilience of not the systems, resilience of the business processes that drive the business. So essentially, what we traditionally used to do was look at all the critical systems. So now we go one step ahead. What are these systems supporting? these are the critical processes for the business. How do we make these processes resilient? Because today's world, the ecosystem is a mixed bag of everything that's internal to a company, massive amount of partnerships. We call it third-party risk, but the way to look at it is third parties enabling the business innovation. So what's crucial is to understand those key business processes and understand how do we make those processes resilient to an outage of a system, outage of, for whatever reason. So cyber being a cause. So as a result, when you look at this resilience, it's more around making sure we have business continuity plans for critical business aspects. And it's also about crisis management. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the crisis management preparedness. So essentially, exercises that we got to run to make sure that each of the business is aware of the risk that they sit on and what they need to do in terms of preparing for potentially an extended outage with the kind of attacks that we see these days. So essentially, trying to build those muscle memory on how to respond to a significant business outage caused by a outage of a digital system or a critical technology system. So it's really, really important to make sure that there are multiple components of resilience. Availability of the systems is one. If something goes off, then how does the business keep running while IT keeps focusing on building the systems back up? What does the business do when that happens? So making sure there are plans for those. How do we communicate to our stakeholders? That's internal and external customers, regulators, a whole lot of things that goes into communication. So it's going to be an all-of-company effort, not necessarily something that people are used to, and probably going to be a very unique situation. So it's an all-of-company resilience and response required to deal with a cyber incident.
Yeah, I mean, a few things that I picked up, you mentioned muscle memory is so important. And for you to develop that muscle memory, you need to do a lot of training, a lot of tabletop exercises, which is not so easy, right, to orchestrate and do. But I think it's so important for people to really go about managing an incident in a very cool and calm manner, as if it's a business as usual. And the other thing is about, this communication strategy, which is, again, a non-technical kind of area for a CISO. And so therefore they need to go that extra mile, but it's such an important aspect of cyber resiliency. So I think, you thanks for pointing that out, Thomas. I think, this is something which all the CISOs need to learn to really get into that space so that, you have a more well-rounded cyber resilient organization, right? While we are talking about all of this, one of the big challenges that we face in the cybersecurity world is about talent, right? And there's a problem right now where we have such a huge demand and such a challenge and constraint in terms of supply and getting the right skilled individuals, with the right passion, right motivation to be there to support the cause. What is your message, in terms of what should the whole ecosystem should think about, not just the cybersecurity professional, because this is a problem for the business, right? So what is your message, and what are the things that organizations should look at and CISO should look at when it comes to nurturing and managing talent and building capacity?
Yeah, great. Again, another great question, Vishal, because this is a constant problem that we are going to face as we keep going through a lot of this digital transformation, embracing a lot more digital technologies. Your attack surface goes up, and it's no longer enough to just have capacity within the cybersecurity team. So we got to think about this differently. It's not about adding more people into the security team. That I think that's gone. That's something we need to look at it differently. Now, the focus really, in my view, has to be focused on enabling people to do their work securely. So it's about massive shift in focus, and you're not looking for talent outside the company to go hire and come. There is nobody there. So there's little you can do by trying to go hire the traditional hiring process. So the approach that I strongly feel that will work for most companies, especially in the current climate with the market and the lack of availability of the right skills and the right culture fit, which is really another important aspect, is to start looking internally. Cyber is not just about technical skills alone. There's a lot of skills required for a holistic cybersecurity implementation. So one good place to look at is your internal teams outside of IT, business customers that you have today, your engineering teams outside of technology. They will have a lot of transferable skills that can then be trained up and upskilled. So that's one way, because that advantage for that, you then have people who already understand the business. Because it's really crucial for a cyber professional to be successful in his or her role, to understand the business they are trying to support. So if you already have half the problem solved with internal candidates, then if you have programs internally to upskill your internal talent and internal people, that's one big step. So obviously it requires investment in training and a focus on that. The other aspect of it is, enabling people to do their job securely. So essentially, this is about training people to securely do their job, and a lot of the problems would be in whether it's software development, or this is where the problems start. So by secure by design, some people call it, but what does that really mean, right? It's about not the security team coming and doing the work for somebody. It's about somebody doing their work, knowing the security threats and the risks associated with the work they're doing, and doing the right thing. And that also means training. So that kind of summarizes everything to be lots of training internally. So investment in training activities, both for the cyber team to keep themselves upskilled to the next set of things that come up, but also about training the business ecosystem, the users, the end users, the people who do all kinds of things within the value chain, partners that we work with, third parties that come in, making sure they all understand how to securely do their roles. Fundamentally, that's what we need to do to kind of a crowdsourcing the help that you need to manage the risk appropriately.
No, I think there are two profound messages from what you mentioned. One is about democratizing cybersecurity, right? It's basically cybersecurity is everybody's problem. Why are you externalizing it only to cybersecurity team? And I think time has come to democratize it, and only then we can scale, right? So that's one message I could take. I think the other message that I've got was about really, how do we, refactor people from within the organization, rather than just look at external talent. So great messages there, and I hope our audience will find some interesting actionables coming from you, Thomas. But I think we covered, really, in a short span, we covered 4 important topics of how the transforming role of CISO, to engagement with the board, to talking about cyber resiliency and imperatives, and what are the key aspects of talent and skills management within cyber. Always a great pleasure talking to you, Thomas, and thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your ideas and thoughts today.
Thank you, Vishal. Thanks for having me.
So friends, that concludes our panel discussion, where we covered different and interesting topics, starting with the CEO perspective on how technology and cybersecurity is going to shape the current and the future of modern enterprise. We looked at a very interesting and different topic of how the brand value gets impacted because of cyber risks. And we have also seen the changing role and imperatives to the modern CISO because of how the digital and cloud is shaping today's and future enterprise. I hope you found the session very useful. Thank you very much for your participation.